Hello, and thank you for tuning into this week's episode of Bite-Sized Cybercrime, the podcast where we discuss cybercrimes and cybersecurity news. This week we will be talking about an AI model that Anthropic insisted it would not release, and then they did. Sort of. That, of course, is Claude Mythos. I discussed Mythos on a previous episode. It is an AI model that is supposed to have a lot of cybersecurity utility, and most people were paranoid that it would put us all out of a job, or it would give hackers too many tools to just completely screw everyone over. This hasn't quite happened yet, especially because it was a very limited release, only to a handful of organizations. Mythos itself continues to roll out to more organizations, but a model based on Mythos known as Fable 5 is also going to be released to the general public. Previously, Mythos was only available to a handful of very important high-tech organizations so they could figure out vulnerabilities before hackers do. Fable 5 is supposed to excel at software engineering, however, heavy guardrails have been placed in what are considered high-risk areas. Basically, Anthropic is trying to limit the things that the AI can do in certain areas that are deemed high-risk, which are areas that could affect actual human safety or organizational safety. Those areas specifically are chemistry, biology, distillation, and cybersecurity. So it's a bit more difficult to ask Fable how to make a bomb. AI has previously been exploited to give away information about these type of things that they probably shouldn't, especially ChatGPT. I remember when there were a lot of memes about having your grandma tell you a bedtime story about how to make meth, and that used to get around the limits of how ChatGPT would normally not tell you how to make meth. Anyone can access Fable now, although there are some complaints about the guardrails already. This isn't just people mad they can't ask about grandma's bedtime story about meth. People are upset that they can't ask basic questions about how the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. Which most people can agree, although it does fall under the biology question category. It is not a particularly dangerous question, as I learned about the mitochondria in, 7th grade? The limits, obviously, were to stop people from asking how to make certain bioweapons or bombs or things like that. However, it seems that it's gone a little bit too far. And speaking of going too far, Anthropic doesn't want their model to train other models, and I think that's reasonable. However, they're going about it in a bit of an extreme way. They are actively sabotaging other models if an Anthropic model suspects it is being used to train them. Anthropic allegedly would deliberately downgrade Claude Fable's performance in ways that weren't really noticeable to the average human user, but would effectively sabotage the other AI models attempting to learn from Claude, either giving them incorrect information or steering them in a path that is not quite up to par with Fable. There are already methods to prevent your model from training other models, which is redirecting the request to a lower model, or simply refusing to answer it. Degrading performance on purpose without telling the user is rather hostile. So, long story short, Anthropic's launch of Fable, which was supposed to be based on the legendary, too dangerous to be used Mythos, didn't quite go as planned and left some people a bit disappointed. Others were able to leverage Fable quite well, but many were disappointed with all the guardrails. It's gone from this legendary model that's so dangerous it'll put everyone out of a job, to one that can't answer basic 7th grade science questions. Anthropic, OpenAI, and Microsoft are in this AI model arms race to try to get ahead of each other and secure their spot as the top AI vendor, and I can understand why. This is a completely new field and it has a lot of potential. Even though ChatGPT was first, it's quickly losing speed compared to other AI competitors, especially Anthropic. Staying on top is difficult in fields that move so fast, so I could see why Anthropic wanted to get ahead by doing something like this. Think about it, Skype kind of dominated video calling until suddenly the pandemic hit and Zoom, a complete unknown, comes out ahead because it just provides a better quality product and scaled a lot better than Skype or Skype for Business ever did. The issue with AI is that it's a calculated risk. You understand that your model could pose real risk to human society, so how do you mitigate that risk, and how do you balance mitigating that risk with your model actually being kind of useful? It doesn't seem like even Anthropic knows the answer to this, and it's a difficult question. Another problem Anthropic is facing is not necessarily the new one, but it's the rising price of AI models. Pricing for Fable 5 and Mythos is $10 per million input tokens and $50 per million output tokens, which is double the price of Opus 4.0, which is another Anthropic model that's commonly used for deeper reasoning. Many enterprises are seeing very, very high AI costs, and it's surprisingly easy to blow through your whole budget, especially if your employees defer to AI for a lot of things and you don't really have training on when it's appropriate to use AI and when it's not, and they just see it as a free tool to do their thinking for them. I guess in that case, some good news is if you don't have infinite money to throw at AI models, the price alone probably will deter people from using Fable in malicious ways very heavily. The question is really becoming, is the cost worth all of that extra power? Part of the reason that the cost is rising is basically because some of these models are taking one question and splitting it into multiple tasks with more advanced reasoning, and that does make sense. You're going to need a lot of context to perform certain tasks at a higher level. If you want your tests to be performed with a higher amount of accuracy, you should probably want this additional context that the AI is now considering. The issue is breaking up those tasks does use a lot more energy, a lot more tokens, a lot more thinking power, and it costs a lot more. So it's a trade-off, ultimately, that businesses will have to decide whether or not is worth it. You can always use lower-level models, but then that limits the potential of AI somewhat. So, I guess long story short, like many things in life, the cost may be the practical limit to the extent you can use AI, and that's going to be interesting to reconcile with employees who want to use these models. Many people already now feel like they can't do their job without using AI, which to me is a bit concerning, given how new it still is and how many unknowns are still in this area. So with the somewhat fumbled release of Fable that requires a lot more fixes than initially thought, didn't quite meet the hype. I do have to wonder at some point when we are no longer able to adequately reconcile the practicality of using a model with the safety of it. To what point do we get to when we just say, screw it, we don't need these guardrails? Or do we just forever limit our potential with safety controls? Either thing we do will be controversial. Anthropic has, of course, responded to the complaints of both the guardrails and the price, and is trying to reconcile with the guardrails a bit. Hopefully then we can see more potential in this brilliant AI model that people who've been able to use it well have said it works very well, better than Opus. As I was recording this podcast, some breaking news about Fable 5 has just been released. The US government has ordered Anthropic to limit the exports of Fable 5. No one outside the United States is allowed to use it, and foreign customers are not very happy. This also includes foreign nationals who are inside the United States. Anthropic has responded by completely withdrawing access to Fable 5 from everyone. Microsoft itself has also labeled Anthropic's Claude Fable 5 a data retention risk to customers and employees. So, it seems the controversy with Fable 5 is not quite over. Thank you to Forbes, Reuters, The Hacker News, TechCrunch, Security Week, and The Verge for information on pretty much everything Fable I talked about today. And of course, thank you for tuning into this week's episode of Bite Size Cybercrime, and until next time, stay secure.